What is the connection between organized religions such as the Vatican, which we've heard over the years has been so intertwined with the Bank of England and the money and on all of that, and the Rothschilds? What is the tie-in with that, and what our relationship is now and to government, and how we can free ourselves from maybe some ties that we have with this entity called the government?
That's a good introductory question, actually, Patrick. I guess the first thing is to understand the ecclesiastical nature of the government and the concept of office, that they like to play down, and yet the symbols are overwhelming. So what you'll get is you'll often get people talk in a reasonable way, saying, look, there is no religion in government, it's purely secular, and all this talk about ecclesiastical is all kind of hocus pocus. But let me explain then. The way the government has been formed in States and in Canada, Australia, and in many Western countries now, the constitutions make clear that the state is separated from the church. But what they don't tell you is that things like, for example, an office. What is an office? When someone holds an office, it actually means they are holding an ecclesiastical, and by ecclesiastical I mean religious, an ecclesiastical position. Because the origin of an office back into the days of Rome meant that you held a religious space. That is, you held your custody over a temple or a chapel or a chamber or some sanctuary. And that is the origin of the meaning of an office. And in fact, if you don't hold custody over a temple or a chapel or a chamber or some circumscribed sanctuary, then you actually technically don't hold an office.
If you technically, if you don't literally, if you don't, if you don't literally,
far away.
Yeah, if you don't literally hold it or possess it, you don't really have the office. In other words, if you're just not sitting there, for example, in the White House, you don't really have the White House.
Absolutely. And in fact, unless you're invested, which is a religious ceremony, unless you're invested into the office, then you don't hold office. So it means from the county sheriff to the district attorney to the mayor to the governor, right up to the president, each and every one of those positions is a religious ecclesiastical position by definition.
How can it be a religious ecclesiastical position if the founding fathers and other, they meant to keep religion and politics separate, didn't they? And don't they put that in the Constitution?
Well, yes, they wanted to separate the church, but the concepts and the constructs are still religious. So, for example, there's a famous letter of the delegates returning from the convention in Paris, the signing of the treaty in Paris at the end of the 18th century, where they're actually described as ministers plenipotentiary. Now, a minister is a religious title, and a plenipotentiary is very much a religious title. And when one views the Vatican, for example, the role of notary is an ecclesiastical role. The apostolic proto-notaries come from the Vatican. The ministers come from the Vatican. So what the founding fathers were saying is, we don't want the church to be sitting there as the executive or the apparatus, but if one wishes to govern with any kind of mandate from the divine, then the office, the position of office, as opposed to just being a tyrant, means that we are evoking ecclesiastical powers.
Who's evoking ecclesiastical powers? The people or the politicians?
The politicians.
They're evoking ecclesiastical powers because? Because
when they're invested into office, they are saying, not only do I have a mandate from the people, but when I order your home to be taken, or eminent domain to take your home, or take the taxes, I am doing so with not just your mandate, but as a representative of the divine. And so I have both the authority of God and the authority of the people.
Much like King Henry, and we see all these great old movies where back then the kings evoked the idea that they were chosen by God.
Yes.
Is that right?
It's exactly the same. And the reason, there is a reason why they need the authority of the divine and not just the mandate of the people, because of the nature of what property itself is. You see, we're taught and image trained in our society through the media to believe that property is the car, property is the home, it is the fridge, it is the clothes. It's not. That's not property. You can't actually physically own anything. There's no law in physics that says you or I can own each other. I can use the fridge, I can use the car, I can use the home, but I can't actually own it.
Mm-hmm.
And much smarter people than you and I years and years and years ago understood this, and understood that the only thing in the universe that can own anything is the divine. All we can do is sell and buy and convey rights of use. And that's exactly what Henry VIII created and promoted in his changes of statutes, was rights of uses. So property then, being right of use, is derived when a group claimed to be the agents of the divine, comes from the top down. So technically, the conveyance and management of property cannot be conducted in a Christian model, in a Western model, in a Roman model, unless it is done through an office. In other words, unless it's done through an ecclesiastical position. And this is the bedrock of Western law.
So let's see if I understand what you just said, Frank, that unless we souls and bodies today, maybe in Texas or Oklahoma or California, would understand this ecclesiastical idea of an office and rights of use, we are then just visitors on our land and can be put off whenever somebody else wants us to leave, and there would be a way to evoke this. We're using this and we have our connection with the divine, so you can't move us?
Absolutely. These mechanics are things that are both used against us and can be used as a strength. And it's why when you begin down this road, there are a number of groups very, very quick to laugh and belittle and deride this. But let's add to the proof of this, because the proof is overwhelming. Let's talk about the instrument that is used to convey property. Now, when I want to convey property, I don't use a normal contract. I need to use a deed.
Yes.
Yes?
Uh-huh.
Now, what makes a deed so special, and why does a deed need to be notarized or needs to be witnessed by someone in an office, in an ecclesiastical office, such as a notary?
I don't know that.
If property is something that ultimately comes from the divine, and then everything cascades from rights of use down, doesn't it make sense that any movement of that property is itself a sacred act, an ecclesiastical act?
If we take the premise that the divine is the only true ownership of everything, and we're just using it, so if we're going to use it for a while with a deed, purchase it, then it is a divine act. Is that what you're saying?
And that's the secret of deeds that they don't want you to know.
That's the secret, because we don't know that they're a divine act when we sign this paper or whatever. Okay. So take us forward.
It's why when people want to reclaim their property and they make a claim of right, that document, unless it is written correctly and in this knowledge, may not be ecclesiastical. So it is not a true deed. And if it's not a true deed, the system will not recognise it. Well, they won't recognise it normally if you try and do it outside of, but they will argue ultimately that it's not valid. They won't tell you why it's not valid, but it's not valid because it is not an ecclesiastical instrument.
Who will tell you it's not valid? In other words,
the cleric.
Oh, in other words, the one that we sign and we didn't know that it was a divine instrument, they say that it's not valid because it's not valid.
Correct.
Huh. And so we could learn how to maybe do a correct one or ecclesiastical one.
Well, this is the central issue. Our ignorance of the origin of the office, our ignorance of the origin and nature of property, our ignorance in the origin of the law and the private law of the private bar guild, of the private courts, all works against us, because that ignorance means that if we ever face a court, firstly, we don't even know what the word court means. We're told that it comes from the word cohort, or an outside space, as opposed to the word courtio, C-A-U-T-I-O, which means something totally different. It means to bond, to bail, and to trade in surety. It's an exchange. If we are ignorant, then the only person in a court that really knows what's going on is going to be the judge. And therefore, we will be, if we challenge, we will very quickly be discovered as incompetent. And that's exactly what they want us to be. They want us to remain incompetent in law.
If we challenge the judge who's really in charge of the court, or if we challenge another person?
If we challenge any aspect of the process, the charge, the fact that they're going to assign our home to a bank, or our car to a finance company, or take our children from us, our ignorance and then our anger, because when one is ignorant and really doesn't know what's going on, but does know that you're about to lose your children, one gets angry. So they use our anger and our ignorance against us every time.
Because if we challenge anything in this court, why do we automatically lose?
We lose because we don't even understand the power of our withdrawing our consent.
Withdrawing
we don't understand that our oath is the thing that they need to make what they do lawful. We don't even understand that we can even stand and say, when they give us a choice of nothing, take one poison or take another poison, that we will comply, but our compliance does not consent. that if we remain in honour and if we even have an essential knowledge, then there almost isn't a single charge or court case or suit they put against us that ultimately can be successful. Because when they put us in their courts, they are making money. It is a money-making business.
So if a judge asks one if they plead guilty or not guilty, that's like picking two poisons.
Well, it does appear, but a plea, we talk about, again, things that originate from a time much earlier. What they don't tell you is that when you go to a court, you're dealing with form of law like a cake. So there's a base that comes from Anglo-Saxon, there's a middle there that comes from common law, and there's a surface at the top of it that comes from commercial law since the 30s. But the base of it is that all law is oral, all law is vocal, and that our oath is our bond. So when you plead, it's a tradition that comes from Anglo-Saxon where you're effectively ordering the court, you're contracting with the court, after the presumption that you have agreed, or that jurisdiction in three forms of personal, territorial, and subject matter have been concluded. That is, what is your name? Franco Collins. Well, then they claim personal jurisdiction because they have the rolls from birth, and therefore if you're on the rolls, you are a voluntary slave.
Or if you have
then
a birth
they say,
certificate.
where do you live? So I live here. I live in Dallas, or I live somewhere. They've got you on territorial. And then they simply say, do you understand the charges against you? And the word understand means understand, under their standing. Yes. Well, I've perfected jurisdiction. Then they say, how do you plead? We are not taught that there is a concept from the very, very beginning that says, I plead demurrer. And demurrer simply means to cease fighting, to hold the adversarial contest until a matter of law is resolved. And the matter of law that we wish to resolve is, hopefully, we haven't simply agreed ourselves to be in their jurisdiction.
Oh.
And if they've ramroded us through, we would like the jurisdiction matter to be tested. So you don't just simply have to say guilty or not guilty.
How do you spell demur? Demur?
D-E-M-U-R-R-E-R, demurrer.
And that means what?
To hold proceedings until a matter of law, until an interlocutory matter has been resolved.
So if one has a birth certificate and then repeats that name in a court, that's other than the best thing because? Or
if you have a birth certificate, then that is a certificate issued by them, by the registrar acting as the keeper of the rolls. So they are claiming your name as their property, and they're claiming the event of your birth as their property. So if one wishes to challenge their jurisdiction, one needs to prove that you have been registered and that the property is contested. The title of property is contested. So, for example, if you consider the fact that your parents named you, and that if one has a generalized view of spirituality, that no one is your master, we are nobody's slave, then one merely needs to prove that fact in a competing model. And that's always the challenge. People have known what they need to do, but in the absence of a competing model, it's technically impossible to out-argue simply. They say they have a role, they say they've registered, it's in their laws. Unless you have a register, unless you have a higher form of law, they have jurisdiction. And that's how they view it.
So just going into their court and saying where one lives or your name, then it's essentially over as far as one's freedom?
Yep, totally. Anyone that walks in and says, I'm a free man or I'm a sovereign,
right,
I'm a living being, has absolutely no effect. It's water off a duck's back.
So would one, I mean, we're going to the extreme here and just saying if somebody ends up in court, but maybe this is a nice way, then we'll work backwards. So if then one was in there, then the thing to do would be to say nothing and just say that I demur?
Well, then you've got to know, yes, but the only reason you would be able to legitimately claim that is that you have contested their title. You see, personal jurisdiction, territorial, and subject matter is an argument of property. The first question is, what is your name? Name comes from Latin nomen, and nomen means the name of the slave, the name of the register, the slave roll. So they are establishing in that one question that you are on the roll, and if you're on the roll, then you are the property of the state.
Wow.
So unless you contest that property issue, the next two questions are just going to perfect that jurisdiction.
How would one contest that issue if they say, are you Franco Collins?
Well, you would have to go to the extent over years and years and years of contesting things like their canon law, their codes of law, creating a higher register, and creating a site that looks similar to One Heaven.
Oh, in other words, that's why you've done this work to establish that you're not Franco Collins, but you're a spiritual being that just happens to be in a body that somebody called Franco Collins?
That's right. I'm a trust recipient number, et cetera, on a higher roll. Look, if the system recognised what people have been saying for a lot longer than I have been around this earth in this particular version, then you wouldn't need the site One Heaven. You wouldn't need UKD. You wouldn't need any of it because folks already know who they are.
Right.
The problem they've been facing is you can't consume a bad idea by walking away from the field. You've got two choices. Either you play their game, which is in their minds a way of them learning. That's why they love contests, because that's how they fix things. Or you do what they've done to us over the centuries. You consume them. But you can't compete by simply saying, I am a spiritual being, I'm a divine being, because they've trained their people at the front line to say, if it looks like a duck, walks like a duck, acts like a duck, it's a duck. So unless you have a society with law, with a higher claim, you're not going to get anywhere.
A higher claim meaning structures in place to be able to perfect the idea that you are a spiritual being and you know it and you've done some kind of physical stuff out here to prove that you are or to state or that you state that you are. So
because
yeah. Go ahead.
Because their system, one of the things they want us to believe when people wake up is that they don't follow their own rules. They want us to believe that.
Say that again. You cut out a little bit.
Don't understand what's going on.
They want us to believe. Oh. Frank, you know what I'm going to do? This is beginning to get a little warbly, and can we switch to the phones?
Yes.
Because this is too cool of stuff, and we're losing some of your words, and we had to break anyway. So, Frank, I'm going to hang up to Skype, and then I'm going to dial you on your landline, okay?
Okay.
All right.
Does that sound better?
Hello? Yeah, a lot better. Okay.
Right.
Well, thanks for doing this, and if you speak up for me, Frank, you're a long way away.
Yes, absolutely.
How far is it? Probably 3,000 or 4,000 miles. Huh?
It's a few thousand miles, but it sounds like I'm just talking to you up in Queensland.
Yeah, it sounds great. Now, thank you for doing this. Okay. So, let's go back a second. I would like to understand more how this whole ecclesiastical idea filtered down all the way from kings. I guess it's been going on for, since the beginning of time, essentially, where people who found themselves in control, did they just begin to say, Frank, that, well, I've been appointed by God, and is that how it all kind of started?
Yeah, think about even, people don't realize this, but even in communist Russia, at the height of Stalin's power, they had elections. Now, there was only one candidate, and if you didn't vote for him, well, there was a gun, usually about 3 inches from your back, but you still did have to technically vote. And I guess the point is, when I use that, is that the symbols of power and the concept of consent is fundamental. And there's really only two ways that people can be managed. They're either managed by rule of fear and absolute control, or they're ruled by consent, or a hybrid, which is what we're about to come into, a hybrid. And the easiest for control is to rule by consent. That is, people agree that you're the boss, and they'll agree to follow the rules, and they'll agree to leave their homes, and they'll agree to give up their children. That's much easier than having tanks on every corner and people with guns and that whole process, because systems that are based purely on tyrants and fear tend not to last that long.
I see. So it's the idea where in this country, especially, and probably all Western countries, people believe they're free, but they're not really, because technically, with a birth certificate, the state owns the child, and we never own our land, and all of that. Correct?
Yeah, well, look, a prison doesn't have to look like a prison. I mean, a prison is designed to look that way, I think, as much to convince us that that's what a prison looks like. But you could have the bars painted in blue, you could have grass, you could have shopping malls, you could have schools, but what's to say it's still not a prison? It's that you don't actually see the inner workings of it until you're in trouble.
And so do you think then that most people, or all people, all souls, spirits, if you will, deep down know that they're in some kind of a prison, and that's this idea of men living lives of quiet desperation?
Yes. And there's something that happens when you know in your DNA, when you know in your instinct, and you choose not to do anything about it. Because when you do that, you might think that you're arguing to survival, but actually what you're doing is you're willingly severing yourself from your higher self, because you're now denying the truth that yourself is being focused and is being claimed by these people. You're severing yourself from yourself. And when you do that, then that's when good people can do bad things.
I see. Can you speak up for me a little bit, Frank?
Yes. That's when good people do bad things.
I see. So if they're internally frustrated and angry of not being authentic, then they take that anger out on whatever.
That's right. They go and they become addicted to alcohol or drugs or pornography. They go and drive their car into, another car. They go and do silly things that if they weren't in that state of turmoil, they wouldn't have done.
Yes. So then can it be argued then that the majority of the people are not perhaps yet on the level that you're speaking of, because they're still working with maybe authorities with issues or control with their husbands and their bosses and such, and they're not in the arena yet of even thinking in terms of being free or not free with governments?
No, they're viewing, how do I continue the life that, and not that I want necessarily, but that I was able to cope with. You know, how do I keep my family together
Right.
and still drink? Or how do I hold my job down and still have a drug addiction? They're not thinking logically. They know that they are spiraling, but at this point they're not looking for any higher purpose. And this is, if you like, this is the downside when a society does start to fall apart. This is exactly what starts to happen. People start to rationalize that the alligator will eat them last. And they forget that even in that thinking, the alligator eventually eats you.
Thinking that they're kicking the can down the road because, they're just frightened and scared and confused and just holding things together, that the alligator is going to eat me last, but you're saying the alligator will eat you.
Absolutely.
In other words, karmically, the alligator is going to get you. Can then you argue that from a karmic perspective, as souls in a body saying, what's going on here, that it could be a detriment to allow people to control you if you deep down you know that they are, that's just as bad, if you will, use that term, than controlling somebody else?
Well, it is. The worst is the worst is when people allow themselves to be disconnected, because then this experience in this vessel ceases to be authentic. It ceases to be the full bandwidth. It's like as we experienced, you lose a certain frequency, and instead of seeing all the colours of the spectrum, you're just going to live in a shades of grey. Now, people may rationalise it, they may excuse it, they may have all these different reasons for it, but once it happens, then you effectively, particularly if you are a parent, you're not just affecting the destiny in the short term of yourself, but you're affecting the destiny of your children. And it also means that people who are increasingly incompetent and increasingly desperate running the system can do more and more. They can build, for example, FEMA camps. They can sack the police force. They can take your pension. And more people will accept it because they've already given up at that first post anyway.
Do you think spiritually then all of us at some point, either this or another lifetime, will have to look at this and work through the karmic connections we have with governments, because that's our karma?
Absolutely. The government is a reflection of ourselves. We might like to think that government has been imposed on us and that there's a long history, and when you read One Heaven, there is a mirror site called one-evil.org which gets into a lot of the history of how things have happened in the world. And when you look at that, you think, well, it's easy to say, well, other people have done it and I am the victim.
Right.
But when we become a victim in our mind, we're actually doing it to ourselves.
When we become yes. So it's the idea then that possibly we chose to be here, and maybe we had other lives when we also chose this. So it is our creation.
It is our creation, and I used to be an ardent antagonist towards the idea of reincarnation. I felt that reincarnation was almost, in a sense, we use the words here, a cop-out, you know, a free pass, until I started to work on the concept of one heaven and this idea that spiritually, if you still believe in a war in heaven, and if you believe in hell, well, you believe a war rages in heaven. I mean, you can't believe in hell and say everything's tickety-boo. If you believe in hell, then you are saying that at a spiritual plane there is a rupture between a good place and a bad place spiritually. So when I looked at that, I started to think about, well, how many flesh vessels have existed on this plane of this existence? And I always thought that it was just a few billion, I should say. until I went back and said, if you are looking at a period, say, of the last 10,000 years, and you wanted to consume the existing system, how many vessels have lived? The figure that came back astounded me, but it was, I think, pretty close. Over 100 billion flesh vessels have existed on this planet for 10,000 years. 100 billion.
Why are you using the figure 10,000?
No, 100 billion, I said.
Yeah, 100 billion for 10. Why are you using 10,000?
10,000 years?
Yeah.
Oh, because really the quality of living on this planet has only really improved in the last 10,000 years. Prior to that, sheets of ice dominated Europe, it dominated America. We really had a much narrower band of land that we could live on. And it's only in the last 10,000 years that we've had really quite a mild climate relative to the last 200,000 years. So in that period, the number of our species has grown enormously, and over time, a lot of us have lived, a lot of us have died. But with that number, 100 billion, I found it now impossible to believe that reincarnation is not a feature of the universe, because for 100 billion vessels, the concept that each one of them had its own unique soul and that it only lived once seemed absurd.
Yeah. So then it's very possible that we've all had hundreds of thousands of lives.
Well, absolutely. I mean, then it became not just plausible, but logical.
Logical, wow. It's the first time I really heard reincarnation argue logically. I like that. That's interesting. Franco Collins is with us. I'll get it. one-heaven.org. one-heaven.org. So you've been at this for a long, long time. What happened in your life that was a tipping point for you to move into this whole idea of spirituality, of this relationship with governments and such?
Well, I guess, I grew up in a very religious family, but not, I would say, a family of ultra-religious, but religion was a feature as much as, what does your uncle do? Well, your uncle is a priest, or your great-uncle is a bishop. So religion was round me from an early age. And I had this, one of the earliest experiences I've had in my life was this sense of communicating with something that you can't see or touch. You can feel, but you can't see. Now, I know that there are many good people out there that claim and seem to have strong psychic ability, and they say, no, I can see a spirit, or I can see this. I'm as psychic as a stone, but this feeling as from an early age that there was this spiritual sense around stayed with me. So at the age of 4, probably to someone listening, it sounds like I had some early misdiagnosed or undiagnosed illness, but I would sit down and I would have conversations. I would have conversations with, sitting in a park, and I would see the world, and I'd see plants, and I'd see life, and I would feel that I would be having these conversations, and it was two-way. And then I would meet people on the journey which seemed to answer that. You'd meet people, total strangers, that would say something to you totally out of context, that would actually answer the conversation I was having. Mm-hmm. So it gave me this sense that there was something more than what I saw. Now, one again could explain it because of this religious background. So there was no event in my life at that point that was the tipping point to investigate the deeper spiritual realm. There were a number of tipping points in my life that I felt that I wanted to dedicate myself to a life purely spiritually, and I tried a couple of times to go and become a priest, and I had a number of dreams that really propelled me to believe that that was my calling. And the only reason I didn't follow through wasn't because I found some, secret message that it wasn't right, or that I'd read that, what they were saying wasn't right. I left because I found good men and I felt that I couldn't live up to that standard. So it was really an inadequacy in my own feeling, as opposed to discovering that you wasn't made up to be, or that they weren't really good people, or that the system was wrong. I actually left because the people I met were far better, in my opinion, at that time than I could possibly be. So it was a romantic journey. And then I found, as I went out, and I kind of moved away from that and said, well, really, this whole religious thing has gone on for too long. It's time to make money. I went off to make money, and then life tips you out of what you're doing, and you have time on your hands. So I was working in finance, and the job went sour, and I found myself out of work, and so that became a tipping point to start reading. So over 25 years of kind of running away from this, in the last, I'd say, 15, 16 years dedicated, I accepted that really I've been fighting against this all my life, and it was time to sit down and actually listen to what was being said to me, and to try and be as authentic as I can with what I'm doing.
So why not the argument of just understanding of this web that we've karmically weaved with governments, and being entrapped, as you say, ecclesiastically, and not knowing it, and the courts and all that are just challenging, just a black hole, to just see that and say, okay, that's interesting. I realize I created that, but now I'm just going to live my life without any of that and just let these people be. Do you think that there's karmically or spiritually that maybe there's more steps that souls can take, that they would be, I mean, you're either free or you're not. How could you be more free?
Look, you're absolutely right, and I think this is important, always important to reinforce, that the first place you're free is in your mind. The first place you're free is in your actions. But then there is the pragmatic aspect as well. Now, the Cathars were a group that lived in south of France, and I'm sure you're well aware of them, and I'm sure people have heard about them.
No, I've not. How do you say it? What are you saying?
Cathars. They Cathars.
No.
They lived in the south of France, in an area of the Languedoc area, and they were the victims of one of the earliest crusades called the Albigenese Crusades, where the Roman cult went into the south of France and rounded these people up and brutally murdered them. But what made them unique is that they literally tried to live a purely spiritual and do no harm lifestyle. They weren't a cult. They weren't extremists. They literally took the New Testament and said, could we live the way this book actually describes? Or are we trapped? Are we never able to live this way? And they actually found a way of sustaining and living, and they'd been doing this for hundreds of years. But they were seen as an absolute threat because of that by the system. Now, their response to it was, because we have reached a point of our own authentic existence, and because we understand who and what we are, we choose not to recognize your corrupted view of the world. But we won't even judge you on that. We will simply live our lives. And as a consequence, they were rounded up and effectively wiped out from history. So there's one thing to say I am not going to participate, and it's another thing to recognize what bad ideas are. And I'll give you a very, very simple example. The Vatican, the Roman cult, otherwise known as the Roman Catholic Church, but really a parasite usurper that was created in the 11th century and that they've hidden from most people their history. They created a concept called canon law. Sounds funny because canons normally you think of ships and pirate ships, but the word canon actually means rule, standard, norm, rod, bar. It means rule of law. In fact, canon law is a fancy way of saying rule of law. And if you go into any of the courts or any of the laws in any Western country, they all say that they run by rule of law, don't they?
Mm-hmm.
So what this group said was, we're going to write a series of laws, and we're going to say these are the laws of all laws. These are the foundation of all laws. Now, if no one argues against this, and if no one presents a competing idea, then this, in fact, then default becomes the rule of law of the world. And that's exactly what they did. And they updated, the last version they updated was in 1983.
And the Vatican did this in the 11th century.
Yes, they started doing this in the 11th century. So,
well, excuse me, where did they get off of saying that they were the ones who were going to create the rule of law? They just made that up?
yes, they did.
Okay.
But here's the thing about a claim. You can go in, and this happened in the gold rush. People went into the new land, the new frontier, and they claimed huge tracts of land for themselves. Remember all the great ranches of Texas, yeah?
Yes.
Now, that wasn't their land. There were people living on the land. They just made a claim. And then what they did in many parts of the new frontier, as you know better than I, in order to reinforce their claim, they then virtually paid the army to be a militia force to enforce their claim. So if there was a native population, an indigenous population, that didn't like this idea that they'd suddenly become the chattel of a new rancher, then the army would come in and clean up the mess. And that's effectively what happened in huge tracts of land throughout the states. So there's an example that, it's easy to make a claim, and if one has the power of a gun with you, then it's easy to support that claim. But the problems for the indigenous is that they didn't counter the claim in a form that got rid of the bad idea. Because what they didn't say is, no, we have already staked out this land. Here are our meets and our bounds, our terrain, and you have now trespassed on our property. They didn't say that. What they said was, no one owns the land. We are merely stewards of the land, and of course they went the way of the Cathars.
Oh, I see. So if they would have played within the system that they did not understand, but who was there to say, yes, you're right, indigenous people, these meets and bounds? Was there anybody there, just a judge or some kind of a third party to say, yes, you're right, and these people that are invading you are wrong?
Well, the divine is a judge. So, for example, let's come back to canon law. The last time anyone challenged the Vatican effectively on their outrageous claims was over 492 years ago, and there was a man by the name of Martin Luther. For over almost 500 years it's been since anyone has challenged them forensically and legally on their outrageous claims. But no one, not even Martin Luther, prepared a full canon law competition to the Vatican to say, look, you can't defeat an idea by walking away. The only way to defeat a bad idea is to consume it.
Consume it?
Consume it.
By understanding every integral part of it and saying, well, prove that?
Correct.
I see. Not fighting it, but looking at it and saying, what is that about?
Well, this is the essence of Qi in the martial arts of Korea and China and the Shaolin. It is the essence of nature of the world. It is in the essence of the universe, is that one is always stronger than two parts.
Two parts meaning?
Light and dark, day and night, sun and rain. When one consumes and consumes the whole, then one becomes the whole. Then there is no conflict. There is no dispute.
Yeah, interesting. Let's get back to some pragmatic things and tie this in, because we have a couple of emails about, your idea on what's going on with the foreclosure and people are wanting help with their foreclosures and stuff. Let's go back to this deed, because it's all hung on the deed. And you said earlier, let's see if I understand, if I remember, that the deed that we have signed when we created the mortgage and did that whole thing with the bank is actually a sacred document, but we didn't know it was?
Yep, absolutely.
And by not knowing that it was, should we not have signed it or made our own?
Well, no. We do need to take back our spirituality, because they are presuming roles, and in many cases they are breaching their own rules. But the knowledge of what it is important. So, for example, what makes a deed is when it is signed by one who holds an office, which is back to that original idea at the start of the interview, that an office is by default an ecclesiastical position.
So we are the only ones that signed the deed, though, Frank. Excuse me for interrupting. So we hold the office?
That's right, but we also need to understand how we hold an office. So when you look at some of the documents on one-heaven.org,
mm-hmm.
and you look at the ecclesiastical deed, one of the words that's used is this word called circumscribed. Sounds like an odd word, but it actually is a very, very old word. Circumscribed means to literally to place a circle around oneself. Now, when one creates a circle, and you're not asking people to literally go and draw this, but it's done as a if you like, a virtual concept. When a circle is around you, then what you've created is a sacred space. And that's where you get this idea called out of bounds. Obviously you've heard out of bounds before.
Mm-hmm.
Well, out of bounds means you have stepped into a circumscribed space that you are not permitted to enter.
We have created this space that no one else can come in.
Correct. And we have created then an office.
An office.
Our body has become literally a temple in the same manner that they create their own temples, like the clerk's office or the judge's chambers.
Mm-hmm.
We have created our body literally in their rules as a temple.
I like the sound of that. Similar to what we can do spiritually, where we create a sacred space where if people try to attack us psychically, spiritually, it just bounces off.
Exactly, and many cultures have different ways of creating circumscribed space. Some cultures use the herbs of sage and other to walk to the perimeters of a space and create that sanctuary that way, but it's all from the same source.
So are you suggesting that humans, souls and bodies, whatever we are, vessels, souls in these vessels, can create an ecclesiastical deed that would be a sacred document, and it would be preferable if we're going to use this land for 50 years or so?
Absolutely, because whilst many of the people in their system, because there is unfortunately a level of arrogance that people have, may view this as strange or silly or hocus pocus, those that run the system, the most senior judges, the plenipotentiary judges, the most senior lawyers, know that the system is built on these principles. So when you understand or acknowledge or have knowledge of these principles and use them with knowledge, then you are a most powerful force when you're dealing with trying to hold your home, save your children, or stop groups like the IRS from taking your money.
People argue that when we play within the system with a Social Security card and a birth certificate and such, we've given away any rights and we have to obey the IRS.
Yeah, but look, it's this idea that you have one chance, or that once you do something, that's it. It's too late. This is, I have to say, in a sense, is part of the apparatus that keeps the system going. in the sense that it says, well, you know, what could one man do, or you've done it, it's too late. Look, it's never too late. It's never too late to say you're sorry. It's never too late to say, I now know who I am. And one can argue, and we do in fact argue very clearly, that the law of necessity, the law of survival dictates that we do sometimes things that we don't want to. And I certainly don't find it enjoyable to stand in the DMV line for 3 hours to renew a license. So, I mean, I don't think it's a choice, it's a necessity. So this is the point. Necessity does not mean consent. Necessity means just that, necessity.
For example, if we were convinced that we were required to get a Social Security number when we were 14 to do a paper route, that was a contract. People call it an adhesion contract, and once you're in, but you're suggesting not.
Well, what we learn, we go back to something we were saying a bit earlier. What we can learn is the power of our oath and the power of non-consent when we remain in honour. See, when we act honourably, we become a most powerful being,
And what does that mean, remain in honour?
Honour is the concept that your word is your bond, that you speak the truth, and that if you do give your word, it means something.
If you say yes, I mean yes. If I say no, I mean no.
That's right.
Being authentic. And then how does that then tie into contracts that we've gotten into and didn't know what we were doing?
Well, we can withdraw our consent at any stage, and we can acknowledge that by issuing an affidavit of withdrawal of consent. We can make known on the renewal of contracts, just as we can vocalise our non-consent, we can also acknowledge it with our signature. And there are many famous cases. There are two methods that can be used, and they're both equally valid. One is the use of the initials V, full stop, C, full stop, placed before the signature is made, placed on the paper where the signature will be, and then the signature is overlaid so that it touches that V dot C dot. And that stands for V coactus, or under constraint. In other words, I have signed this out of necessity, but I do not give my consent.
That's V dot C?
Dot. That's right. V dot C dot. And you can find this all on the homepage of one-heaven.org under ecclesiastical deeds. There's a box there.
So you're essentially, would you sign this anytime you're signing anything that you don't really want to sign?
Always.
V dot C. And you're saying, I'm signing this, but I'm just doing it because you're making me sign it and I don't really mean it?
That's right. Well, for example, say that you get arrested for whatever reason,
right,
and you're walked into now the modern processing of these big sheriff processing centres. The sheriffs now addressed as military, and they're trained that anyone that deviates from the process is to be slammed to the ground. In some precincts, they even have tasers. In some other precincts, they even put them in chairs and restrain them. So, in that process, the last thing you want to do is give lip service to a sheriff's deputy on your rights. Yeah?
Oh, yes. You wouldn't want to go there. That would be not good.
So one can sign V.C. and your signature, knowing that when it comes time to argue that you contracted at that point, you can show very clearly that you did what you did under constraint, and legally it has no standing. Now, what happens is, of course, the system learns and the system says, we've heard about this and we're going to stop that now. There is a second way, and it's called the ellipse. And the ellipse is actually fundamental to all forms of writing for the last 1,000 years. And what the ellipse is three dots. Dot, dot, dot. And what the three dots says before you sign on top is that I wished to write something that even writing it, I was under constraint. So let's go back to that scenario again. You're in the sheriff's processing centre. It's 6 months down the road. People have heard about V.C. and all the sheriffs have been told if someone puts V.C. they're going to bash you over the head.
Ooh.
Well, it would be silly then to put V.C. wouldn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So you go ...
And then your name?
And then your name, and that is an ellipse. And that's saying I would have written V.C. but there was a sheriff there with a taser telling me that if I did that, I would be tased.
But it's difficult to imagine that a few dots mean anything, Franco Collins.
Well, dot means everything. I mean, what you are talking about a system that claims the law as its own. It publishes it and tells very few people. Their system is based on secrecy. Their system is based on ritual. It's based on hidden meaning. So 3 dots to their system means everything. Now, one could say, I'm going to proclaim my rights here in this environment, but as I said, to do that in that kind of environment where the sheriffs are trained now that anyone that deviates is to be restrained or tased would be foolish. So it's not that I made 3 dots significant, they made 3 dots significant. And that's the essence of the ecclesiastical deed. When we ask people to seal it in blood, I think that is, a ritual of blood that's been around for far too long. I think it's abhorrent, I think it's archaic, but it means something to them. It means something to their system, and that's why it's used up until the end of this year.
So this ecclesiastical deed on that you've worked, did you get help from the angels working this stuff out?
I think we get help from the angels every day,
sure.
Patrick.
Yeah, I think so too. So I would argue. I mean, would you argue then that most things come from the other planes, and we're just bringing them down, huh?
Well, I think so. I think, but we're here to live a life, and I give thanks every day to all that help, even those that attack, because those that attack often are giving me evidence of something that needs to be fixed. So yes, I mean, I think that's right.
Yeah. So this ecclesiastical deed that I assume that one could learn on your website and learn more about this, how is this used in physical reality to help one to be more free?
Well, the first thing that folks need to do is to challenge the false presumptions that the system makes in claiming ownership of your name, ownership of your body, and ownership of your soul.
So the system claims that they own who I really am as soul?
Yes.
Really?
Yep.
That's a pretty big claim.
It's a huge claim.
Where do they get off doing that?
Well, even the word record is a claim of owning your soul in plain sight.
Is that
the word record actually means res, property, cordi is soul.
Really?
Yep. Hidden in plain sight.
Record means hidden in plain sight?
No, record means property, and cordis, soul. One of its meanings is soul.
Cordis is a Latin for soul?
Latin. This is Latin. So res, cordis. One interpretation of it is property, soul.
So we have a record of your soul, so we own it?
Yes.
And when did we give them a record of our soul?
When we were registered at our birth, which is a legal requirement around the world, and now a requirement under the United Nations since 1940 or 1950 or so.
Since when?
About 1950 or so. I don't know the exact date when the United Nations passed a law that every child needs to be registered.
But many people just have babies at home and don't do a birth certificate now.
Which is great, but you find that a midwife, if a midwife is in attendance, is required by law to register, even if the parents do not.
Mm-hmm. What if someone has a birth certificate on their child? Can they get rid of it?
Well, this is what we're saying. the first thing that one must do is challenge their title.
Challenge their title. In other words, challenge the title that the state says they have on this soul.
And their body and their name.
Their name. So their name, their body, and soul.
It all stems from you being on a role being a register. So you write to the Vital Statistics or the Department of Birth, Deaths and Marriages. You write to that department because that's the department that registered the child at birth anyway.
Yes.
So while we have found that most registrars are totally ignorant about remedy on how one is removed from the role, and in some have argued that even though they don't publish publicly the birth, they still claim it to be a public record. The reason you write at that level is you are establishing a claim of right. You're saying, I am a divine immortal spirit. I am claiming through my association with a spiritual society, I am claiming ownership of the name, my flesh, and my spirit, and no one can claim that, and your society certainly cannot. Now, once you do that, then you're on the path to reclaiming who you are and becoming authentic as to who and what you are. Just the process is enough to start. See, people get obsessed in saying, I want the document from them saying, I'm terribly sorry, we didn't mean to claim your soul, your flesh, your name, here you go. Well, I don't know if even the society will ever give that to us before it all changes anyway. It's the process that's key, the knowledge that's key.
So one cannot expect an acknowledgement that, okay, well, you're off.
Well, ultimately, yes. Ultimately, they have to show honour, or their whole system is in complete dishonour. But what I'm saying is, when people look at this, don't think that this is a magic bullet that you write to your registrar and the registrar says, I'm terribly sorry, here's your beneficial entitlement at birth, we didn't mean to take all this energy from you. It's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
But what you have done is you have officially lodged a perfected claim of right. And what that then means is no one in their system then can presume your consent. No one in their system can presume when they take something from you that you are agreeing to it anymore.
Because you have that document that you sent them, a copy of it?
That's right, because you have a copy of that and you have recorded it and you've had it registered and you are now moving forward on that, and when they don't respond, you'll be following up with a dishonour. And when you are prepared to defend your claim of right, then that is when you've perfected your claim of right. When you're prepared to defend who and what you are, then you've started to perfect your claim of right.
And how is that done?
That's done by a deed of ecclesiastical dishonour. Now, if you go back to the principle, and this is absolute fundamentals to property law right throughout the world, if property ultimately all comes from the divine, and that's exactly how this system is based, it all comes from the divine, and that an agent claims it, so that's why the Vatican is so important, then if an officer that is dealing with the conveyance of property is in dishonour, then that means they are unable to operate in ecclesiastical space and convey property. They are not supposed to perform any duties. So dishonour is an extremely important issue, even if the present system doesn't really remember or understand why it's important.
So, and the officers get in dishonour when they don't respond to you?
Correct, when they don't act in their role. You see, they have duties and obligations which for years now have been completely ignored.
Right.
But they're obligations in recognising what they're doing. Whether they are conveying $50 billion or $50, it doesn't matter. It's the principle that matters. Now, ultimately, what a officer does that outrageously ignores dishonour and continues is that they effectively excommunicate themselves from their ecclesiastical authority. And whether lawyers today realise it or judges realise it, it is embedded in their very law that if they persist, then they have lost all right. It means if a judge has sentenced someone, that sentence is null and void. On appeal, it must be thrown out. It means any conveyance is null and void. If they've sold your home, it's invalid. On appeal, it can be thrown out. And it will be thrown out, because if they act in dishonour and they continue to act in dishonour, then they've lost the very thing that makes what they're doing lawful.
I would assume that most bureaucrats, workers in the system have no idea of what you're talking about.
They have absolutely no idea. But if you think about how you are prepared to defend your rights and defend your claim, when you reach the level of a Supreme Court, they know exactly what you're talking about.
Are you suggesting that one might have to go all the way to the Supreme Court to get some remedy?
I'm saying that what's happening is enough people are starting to wake up that the knowledge is filtering down. So thankfully, no, not everyone has to do that. But certainly in the early stages, it has required people to really take the dishonour right up the line to the level, believe it or not, of going across to the Queen. In some cases, people have even written to the Pope, because the dishonour of the lower levels of officials either don't know or they don't care. But what's happening is people are saying, you know what, I understand now. It's not just simply saying I'm free. I actually have to make it clear by the present system that I'm free. I need to perfect my claim of right. As that's happening all around the world now, people are finding that just starting the process causes an effect to their court case or their foreclosure. And we've had countless numbers of people come back to us and say they stopped the foreclosure, or they closed the case down, or, these kind of things are already starting to happen now because people are waking up to exactly what this is. The significance of an ecclesiastical deed isn't because we created it. It's because it represents the root foundation of their own legal system. So when they dishonour it, they are pulling down their own temple.
So, do we not always, though, have to pay for what we have, right?
Yes.
Doesn't it always have to be an exchange somehow? So, in the way of foreclosures, if people don't pay the note, I mean, there's some kind of karmic thing going on there. Why should people get the home without paying for it?
Well, there is a concept that's been around for a long, long time called promised land. It's been there in the Bible for a while, yes?
Mm-hmm.
And the promised land didn't say that you wake up one day and someone's going to give you a fully furnished home and an acre block and there you go.
Mm-hmm.
It was simply saying that you have a right, and the right is that you have the right to possession of some space in which to make your domicile. Yeah?
A divine right? A divine right?
A divine right.
But would we not have to pay for that in some way?
Exactly. It doesn't mean that you are free then to go off and take someone's home,
mm-hmm.
or break into someone's home and claim it as yours, or just sit around waiting for someone to give it to you. What it separates is we have a right to own a home, to have a home, and we have a right to protect our home. Now, if we are delinquent in our obligations, there needs to be a separation between performing those obligations and our rights. And this is what has been the failure of foreclosures. If someone has taken out a huge loan then they must accept responsibility for their actions.
Mm-hmm.
However, is the penalty that they lose their right? And I would argue no. Now,
the right to stay in the home?
Well, the right of a home needs to be protected, because when it is not protected, it tears at the fabric of any society. And a society cannot be sustained, and property cannot be sustained if it can be arbitrarily taken, as it is being done at the moment, for some of the most ridiculously small reasons. And what it does is it breaks down people's obedience to their own obligations. So what foreclosures is doing is it actually causes the whole system to start to fall apart. So I agree with you. One of the choices you should be able to make is that in an urban centre, that if you want a home, you have to buy a home. You have to earn money, but it's still a right that you have, but you still have to buy it. If you're living in the wilderness and the land is not a reserve, it's not some special preserved land, it simply is unused land, then you should have a right to build a home. So I think here, and what I'm trying to promote with what we're doing, is everything people do must be responsible. You must approach any court matter responsibly and honourably. That's first and foremost. But recognise what they do exceeds their authority, and what they're doing is wrong. And two wrongs don't make a right.
What about the issue of property taxes? It seems like it's a big one around the country, that most people intuitively believe that it's just, there's something wrong about that.
Excellent point. And what you find, that this shows you the power of the spirit knowing something's not right and yet not quite being able to put their finger on it.
Right.
What most folks don't realise is that when you take out a mortgage, you are a tenant. They may claim you're an owner, but you are actually in fact a tenant. You do not hold legal title to the land. And they say you don't hold legal title. So as a tenant, you pay rent. Now the rent you pay, they call interest. And in fact, economists know that economists call interest economic rent. So they call it rent. It's just they don't tell us that that's the rent. So as a tenant, you pay rent, you pay interest, and then you have a principal you have to pay as well.
Mm-hmm.
Now, at the same time, when you are a tenant, the property tax is the rent owed by the landlord to a higher landlord. So your landlord...
The landlord, excuse me, say that again? The property tax?
Property tax is the rent
mm-hmm.
of your landlord to their landlord.
There's two landlords?
Well, there is. When you take a mortgage, your landlord is not the state, it's the bank.
Right.
And the bank got the property from the state. So who do you think the landlord of the bank is?
The state.
Exactly.
How did the state own the property?
By claiming that the land is owned and controlled by them through their land register.
Oh, so they just said, this is ours, this is Texas, or this is whatever.
Yeah.
Connecticut.
Well, through letters, patents, and charters back to the Virginia Company,
mm-hmm.
and all these claims that were unrebutted. Yeah.
So when a claim is unrebutted, it sticks.
That's right. It works both ways. And you've probably heard the statement, one who does not assert their rights has none.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it goes the other way as well.
So let's see. So the state made a claim on this piece of dirt some time ago, and nobody rebutted it, so then they own it. So we come up and say, I'd like to purchase an acre of this, and we go to a bank, and I've heard that we actually create the money with our signature, and that they give it back to us. Is that correct?
It is, but unfortunately, it's a bit of a rabbit hole. That.
Okay, you don't want to go down there?
Well, it's a rabbit hole in that, yes, it's true, but it doesn't change the effect.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah, what people don't realise is that they're a tenant, and what they do when you are falling behind on payments is they do not want you to pay another cent
Why?
because they need you to become delinquent.
Because?
Tenancy is a long-standing historical precedent. A long-standing tenant has a right in common law that dates back for over 1,000 years. It's called the right of redemption. And the right of redemption says that a tenant, upon redeeming themselves, cannot be dislodged from their tenancy.
Really?
Yes.
So if somebody gets behind as a tenant 3 months and then they get caught up, what have they just done?
They've redeemed themselves.
But then if they get behind again, they could get kicked out.
No, it's only when they're declared delinquent. See, the obligation of the tenant is to protect the property, to take good care of the property, and to pay their rent.
Their mortgage.
Now, what was the rent on a mortgage? The rent on a mortgage is the interest, isn't it?
Yes.
Not the principal, the interest.
So you're saying that if somebody can't make their payment, they should just make the interest payment?
Well, if you're a tenant, what are you obliged to do? Just pay the rent.
Pay the rent.
So
Interesting.
you see the deception?
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. So then what does one do? Does one then try to get a different kind of a sacred deed that then they could get into a position where property taxes could not be levied upon them and not get kicked out?
Sure, there's two paths. One path is to claim your right and to separate yourself from the system.
In other words, with the birth certificate and all that, she said.
Same, you do the same for land. So the birth certificate is for your flesh, your name and your soul, and the same can be done for land. But the other option is to evoke two things that you always have as a right. One is to redeem yourself as a tenant so that you can't be declared delinquent, and secondly, to pay a consideration. My original rent as interest might have been $500 a month. I can only pay $100. So I make that offer. I show that for every month of tenancy where there has not been rent paid, that I am now making that payment. And when you do that, what you'll find, two things will happen, and it's extraordinary to see. The bank will refuse to accept your money, even though they claim you owe them money. They will refuse to accept it. Refuse. And the court, which is a bank, will refuse to accept it. So what you need to do, and again, these are notes that will be appearing on One-Heaven under a new section, How to Save Your Home, which is a new section that will be up in the next 2 weeks. But what you need to do is make clear the court cannot declare a foreclosure against you as a delinquent tenant if they do not give you the option to redeem your delinquency.
So if they refuse money they have been doing, if you just were paying them the interest, you could work this thing out without getting kicked out.
100%. Correct.
So if one's lost their job, there'd be a way that they could honorably stay until they work it out.
Correct. And this is an option that the banks have always had, but choose not to follow.
But one would have to take back their name and who they are as soul.
No.
First.
Not on a tenancy.
No.
The people have two options. They can go the whole hog, or there will be these less controversial options where the system can reform itself and you can say, I'm a tenant, I know I'm a tenant, I know you've misled me, but I'm here to redeem my outstanding rent.
The deed is somewhat like, is it like a will that we could change?
Well, you can always seek to renegotiate, and that's part of what you're doing. It's called consideration. It is the terms of the contract have changed. When I contracted with you, I was employed. I'm now unemployed. Therefore, there are material changes in the circumstances. And contract law, for thousands of years, has always recognised that a contract by right can be renegotiated when a fundamental principle has changed.
We're with Franco Collins. Let's move on to taxes. And what is this whole idea of paying unto Caesar what is Caesar's?
Well, it's a tribute. It's a tribute, and it effectively is the energy that they are taking from you. I mean, ultimately, the question is who owns the land? They claim they own the land. So, taxes on property, to me, is an antiquated and an abhorrent element that really is still from the feudal days. And whilst people say, well, we charge taxes for services, we are now in a situation where we have indirect taxes like goods and services and VAT and sales, and we have service fees. So it's perfectly able to change the system to service fees to say this is your service fee for your utilities, like the water and all the other things that come to your property, and people accept it. But tax remains because the system remains in large part medieval. They've just spruced it up.
The Supreme Court has actually ruled that when we just trade our labor for dollars, it's an even trade, and it's not a taxable event. Is that correct?
There is
case law to support that.
Yes.
However, it seems like the IRS is simply a collection agency.
They are.
And
indeed.
so they're just out there dialing for dollars. And so the law notwithstanding, legally, morally, ethically, if there are no taxes, when you just simply trade, there's no profit there, right? You're just trading.
That's right.
How does one protect themselves with that if they choose to go down that hole or roll or whatever it is?
Well, the key thing with the IRS is knowing what is their ultimate claim and how do they get to make such draconian claims on you. Mm-hmm. And it is because of the nature of two things. Effectively, the IRS uses the fact on these notes that under the Federal Reserve Act, when you use private money, and that's exactly what Federal Reserve notes are, private money.
Right.
Under the law, you become an agent of the IRS. So we're all agents of the IRS. So the agents of the Federal Reserve, sorry.
Oh, the Federal Reserve, yeah.
Yeah, which makes the IRS lawfully able to collect rent from the use of their private property. Basically like paying, we've got to pay our dues.
We're paying rent on the dollars.
We're paying rent on the dollars.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now, underneath that, they have an additional claim, which they don't like revealing because it's highly controversial. Mm-hmm. And that is the fact that when we're born, our live birth record is monetized.
Yes.
And a QSIP number is issued from the DTC, and it's securitized, and it's then sold as a bond to the bank.
To which bank? Federal Reserve Bank?
Yes.
So our QSIP number, which is a number that one has on a security or such.
That's right.
And that they take our birth certificate, and then we're put as collateral for the debt.
A live birth record, that's right.
Mm-hmm.
It's collateral for the debt, exactly.
The $14 trillion or whatever. That's the stated debt. I assume it's a lot more than that.
A lot more than that.
Yeah. So our ability to get up and work every day, we are collateral for that debt.
Correct. Mm-hmm. Now that they claim flesh as property, anything that the flesh produces technically is whose?
Theirs.
That's right.
Well, that doesn't sound very good.
It's not.
It's not. So, but as you know, with this collection agency, the IRS, they can and do all the time simply invoke penalties for somebody if they don't like the way you filled out a form, and you can write them back. And people I've heard done, and they say, "Well, what's this penalty for? Please prove this." And they never do. They just continue to just go on and say, no, this is what you owe. Well, please prove it, and they won't because they can't, and then they'll take your bank account if you're not careful. So what's that about?
Well, if the banks and the IMF and the system right up to the top owns your flesh,
yeah,
and they're a collection agency, then what can they do if they own you? What can they do?
I guess anything they want.
And that's what they do.
So doing the whole deed, doing the birth certificate thing would be helpful with the IRS?
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely. He said, that was a dumb question. I think I'm beginning to catch on. So in between that, if you get a love letter from the IRS saying you owe this or that for some kind of fine because you didn't do this right, would you write them back, and what would you say to them?
I'd just set it off and say, there you go.
You would do what?
You're a set-off. And what a set-off is, you've probably heard this thing, accepted for value, which is unfortunately very dangerous.
Is it?
You can never alter one of their documents unless you are lawfully doing it in a lawful manner. So they provide coupons to you. They have to. It's part of their principle. They have to provide coupons. If they demand payment, they have to give you the method by which to receipt and return the payment.
Mm-hmm.
So you cannot alter the face of their documents, but you can enter the coupon. So when they claim $1 million, they're not claiming it against you, they're claiming against the fictions. They're claiming against the person, yeah?
Oh, the name that they own.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Now, once you've laid your claim to ownership of what you own, then they're left with the crumbs, aren't they?
Okay.
So once you've said, I own the name, I own my flesh and I own my spirit, and here is my claim of right. It's ecclesiastical, it goes to the roots of your system. Then you can pay that because it's your property. Good luck to you.
And how do you pay it?
Well, you just set it off. You basically put in the numbers that they claim. You fill in the details that it's in fact their property. And there's wording for this, and we don't have this on the site.
Oh, I see, but that's that whole A for V.
Yes,
no?
But it's not accepted for value, because accepted for value has within it, unfortunately, techniques that require people to deface public documents, which is a dishonour, and do it in such a manner that renders what you're trying to do null and void. So accepted for value was a way of nipping in the bud this knowledge by teaching it to people wrongly.
Oh, I see. It was a subversive kind of a...
Totally. Accepted value is totally subversive. The concept is right, but the training is designed to get you into the maximum trouble.
Oh. How does one learn how to do it correctly?
A bit of patience, because there are a few people that know this, and it's increasing, which is why we use the word set off.
Set off.
Set off rather than accepted for value. I know A for V sounds very sexy, but it fortunately, because of it being what it is, it puts people in a lot of trouble.
So there would be a way to set off something without defacing their documents.
That's right. Set off by balancing the debt, by effectively authorising them to set off the debt against their own books and zero the account, because it's their property.
But they must send you a coupon that you owe $340 and it looks like a little check.
That's right.
And because they're not really asking for the money till they send you that.
That's right.
Is that correct? They'll say you owe this or that. And there's a way. Are you going to show people how to do that? Or
yes.
Okay, soon on your website? Or
yes.
Coming soon to a theater near you?
Yes.
And that's lawful, legal, ethical, moral, karmically cool?
Absolutely.
Everything? No bad juju there? No bad karma?
No, because the issue is, if you can, because they take your energy. You see, they make billions, and people may find this unbelievable to realise. The system is so inefficient that it's losing hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars a day. The whole financial system.
Yes,
in the world.
it's just imploding, isn't it?
Yeah. It's losing that every day. When they sell your live birth record, they're making billions of dollars of you. So you're worth in their system billions of dollars, yet they only give you a pittance. Now, I'm not saying that people should sit down on their fingers and do nothing. We are responsible for our own lives, we're responsible for our own learning, and we need to stand up and start to act in honour, which is what I was saying. Take responsibility.
And we act in honor, Frank O'Connor, by learning what we've gotten ourselves into karmically.
Correct.
Paperwork.
Correct.
Kind of
learning.
Yeah.
Learning about the law, learning who and what you are, listening to broadcasts like yours, reading, and actually becoming a fully aware, responsible, divine immortal spirit in flesh.
Karmically, that sounds pretty good on the face of it.
Sure.
Doesn't it?
Yeah.
Huh. I wonder, just waxing philosophical here, I wonder if we didn't get this, if we'd maybe have to come back into a body again to get it right one time. I don't know.
I think it's been, yes, I think it's been a work in progress.
Right. We've probably all been at this many lifetimes, and maybe this time we have a shot at it.
I feel that.
I mean,
yes.
think about this. 300 or 400 years ago, be able to turn on your computer and listen to this. I mean, or even 2 years ago.
Yes.
Huh?
Yes, it's an exciting time, and it's all coming to this moment.
So, now your website is pretty, it's like loaded. And how do you recommend people navigating this and learning the ropes about this? Is there a good way, a better way than others than when they go to one-heaven.org?
Yeah, they'll come to this with a need. They'll come to this at a particular moment, so there'll be an issue. It could be the IRS, could be the home, could be a job, could be their children are taken away from them, could be whatever it is. So I recommend that you come to it from whatever that issue is, and then you read what is relevant to you. And once you feel that you've found a couple of things relevant to you, then you broaden out your reading. That you read the canons of law, that you read the ecclesiastical deed, and just take time. I mean, look, the problems that we have don't happen overnight. If we have a problem with tax, in most cases it's something that builds over a year or more. So I would simply say to people, give yourself the time to read and reflect, and always go and read other things, so that you're not simply reading and believing, that you test every idea. I always say to people, anything to deal with Eucadia is not to be taken on face value or faith, but to be treated as a model, an idea, and no one is required to believe it. This is not some new belief system. These are tools.
And then what if someone has no real issues? Why would one dig into this work? In other words, most people don't really have any tax issues or child issues or home issues. They just pay their mortgage and go on their way. What would be the argument for digging into your website in that regard?
When good people do nothing, what happens?
You say karmically something ends up happening to you, so you get...
Well, there's an old phrase, when evil thrives when good people do nothing. So, in other words, you are still claimed, your body is still claimed by the banks, your name is claimed by the system, your soul is claimed by the system, whether you have no problems or you have problems. So you can do nothing, or you can do something.
Are you suggesting there may be, by doing nothing, perhaps the universe or God will place you in a position where you'll have to do something so you could learn who you are?
No, because no. I believe that there is a certain amorality, that is a certain neither good nor bad, light nor dark aspect to the broader universe, in the sense that if we don't, but I think where it comes in is this: if you do not evoke an action, a willful action, to take command of your own life, then I truly believe the spiritual support is inhibited in then helping you. In other words, if we won't help ourselves, it's very hard spiritually for other forces to help us.
It's the old idea that when we give 100%, well, then God kicks in the rest.
Correct.
I always like that one.
Correct.
Yeah. So spiritually, you may really be on to something here. I suppose, I guess, can I assume that you feel like these times are really, really curious?
Well, we made them to be this.
The next few years, do you think there's going to be some interesting things going on with all this? What do you...
Absolutely.
Like what?
Well, we wrote, we've been here before, we wrote 1260, well, at the time of Daniel, we said that there would be a reign of evil for 1260 days or 1260 years, and the Catholic Church was founded by the French in 751. So if you add 751 and 1,260 years, you get the year 2011.
No, wait a minute, whoa. Let's work backwards again. That sounded pretty cool. Say that again now?
Well, people, the foundation of the Catholic Church, not the Christian Byzantine Church, was founded in 751.
751.
By the Pippins. There was the Franks. Charlemagne and his father and grandfather founded it.
Did they?
And they went back to Rome and they set up the Catholic Church against the Byzantines because of what had happened to them. But if you add 751 to one of the oldest prophecies, most important prophecies of the Bible, which is 1,260 years.
1260?
Yeah.
And what prophecy, Frank, was that?
That is Daniel, in terms of the reign of 7 times 7, and getting down to the reign of evil, and Revelation, the reign of evil. It's repeated in both books. It's one of the rarest examples of repetition of prophecy.
Repetition of prophecy. So they say it over and over again.
They say it more than once, which makes it more significant. Then you get the year 2011.
1260 and 751. Wow, that's where we are right now. So how does it work in with this whole 2012 stuff?
Well, it means that
it's all part of it, I guess.
Well, it's all part of it. We've learned whatever we've learned in this cycle. It's now time to rebalance.
Yeah. Do you think this United States government, as we know it, let's see, do you think they'll just implode on themselves by doing all this secret stuff that we didn't know for so long?
They're not really good at learning at the moment. I wish they would learn, but they just seem to be a bit like the scorpion on the back of the frog. They know if they sting the frog, they'll drown, but they can't help themselves.
And it's much the same in Canada, Australia?
Yes.
It's all the same people?
Yep. And which to me is a sign of mental illness. It's not a sign of evil. It's a sign of dire need of medical attention.
Where they're kind of crying out to saying, we don't know what we're doing, but we're just going to keep moving forward because we don't know what else to do.
That's right. Well, that's the definition of madness, isn't it?
And so you think that by learning this whole construct, there's some things we could do spiritually in the form of paperwork, etc., that help move us forward in some way to protect ourselves.
Yes.
Well, Frank, this has been... My head's about to explode, but I like it. So what kind of things are we going to be moving forward on your website? heaven1-heaven.org?
Yeah, there'll be updates on helping folks in terms of how to save their home, how to save and grow their community, about community currency, about being not just personally self-responsible, but as a community self-responsible, not sort of sitting around wondering why no one has a job. Get out there and work together.
Yeah,
these are the tools that we're working on.
Do something. And then you're going to do that whole set-off thing without defacing their property, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Is that pretty close?
Very close.
Well, it's been an honor. Thank you for staying up. I know it's 4 o'clock in the morning there in Australia. So you can go to sleep now, Frank O'Connor.
Yes.
It's been an honor to have you on here. Can we do it again sometime?
Sure.
I would love to. Thank you. Can folks reach you, or you probably don't do the email thing?
Don't do the email, but go and have a look at one-heaven.org.
Yeah.
And there's a few other sites as well they can go and have a look at too.
All right, sir. Frank O'Connor, it's been an honor. See you soon. Take care.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.